has been watching events in Ukraine with great concern. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Russia's actions in surrounding Ukrainian military sites, violating Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, are completely without any justification? And does he further agree that these actions deserve to be condemned unreservedly across the international community?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I agree with the right honourable gentleman that what Russia has done is completely unacceptable. We should be clear about our national interest and our aim in all of this. Our national interest is that we have a strong interest in a world where the rule of law is upheld, where territorial integrity is respected. Stability is a vital part of our long-term economic plan, and we should be clear that our aim is to deter further Russian military action and to de-escalate this situation. And he's completely right to say that the action by the Russian government should be condemned by the whole world.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we agree there needs to be continuing pressure on the Russian government, and I will come to that issue. But all members will welcome the talks that are going on as we speak between US Secretary of State John Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov. Given the fragility of the situation on the ground, does the Prime Minister believe that one important outcome from these talks would be if they led to direct high-level talks between Russia and Ukraine?
In order to de-escalate this situation, the most important thing that should be arranged is a forum for discussions in which the Russians and the Ukrainians can speak to each other. There have been some contacts between Russian ministers and Ukrainian ministers. This morning there are meetings taking place in Paris covering other issues as well, but there has been some progress in putting together a contact group, an idea that I proposed to the Polish Prime Minister back in January, to start having a group of countries around Russia and Ukraine to encourage such dialogue to take place. That's the single most important thing that could help to de-escalate the situation.
Mr. Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, clearly we all hope for a good outcome from those talks, but the EU also has a crucial role to play. And does he agree that the EU at the Leaders' Summit tomorrow must show it is up to the task of dealing with the biggest security crisis on its continent since Kosovo? Given the issues raised about the UK's position from the leaked Downing Street document, can you tell us specifically what the UK will be tabling at the summit tomorrow, including keeping open the prospect of trade sanctions?
Well, first of all, it is important that the European Union shows a unity of purpose and a clear voice tomorrow at the leaders' meeting. What I think we need to do is, first of all, be absolutely clear that the status quo we're faced with today, where Russian troops are outside their bases in the Crimea, is unacceptable. And as I've said, costs and consequences need to follow from that. That is why, for instance, we've suspended preparations for the G8 meeting. Indeed, it is hard to see, in these current circumstances, how a G8 meeting can properly go ahead. We've withdrawn royal visits and ministerial visits to the Sochi Paralympic Games. There are further steps that we should consider even as we look at the current status quo, but we also need to consider what extra steps, what extra, as I put it, political, economic and diplomatic steps can be taken to discourage Russia from taking further steps in terms of dismembering and disrespecting the territorial integrity of Ukraine.
I completely share his view about the G8 and the other matters that he mentioned. Let me raise one other specific issue with him. When he was leader of the opposition in 2008, at the time of the invasion of Georgia, he said this: Russia's elite values their ties to Europe, their shopping and their luxury weekends. Russian armies can't march into other countries while Russian shoppers carry on marching into Selfridges. Does he agree with me that if we do not see the required action from Russia, we should look at asset freezes and travel restrictions on designated individuals so that Russia is clear about the consequences of its actions?
As I have put it, when we look at the diplomatic, economic and political steps we could take, nothing should be off the table. We've already taken some important steps in terms of the Ukrainian corrupt oligarchs and making sure that their assets are properly dealt with, including here in the UK, if that's the case. So we shouldn't rule out other things for the future, but as I've tried to explain today, I think there are those steps we need to take in respect of the current unacceptable situation, and then agree with our European partners and our American partners, and I'll be speaking to President Obama this afternoon and meeting with Angela Merkel and President Hollande before the European Council tomorrow, agree with them what further steps should be taken as well.
Red Miliband.
I'm sure he will push for as broad an agreement as possible at the EU Council, and we welcome that. Let me ask him about the Ukrainian government and support for them. Does he agree that part of the way forward is providing them with that support, while making clear to them that the government needs to be inclusive and protect the rights of the Russian-speaking population within the Ukraine? And does he further agree that there is no reason for Russia to believe that strengthening ties between Ukraine and the EU needs to be at the expense of Russia?
I think it is important, as the right honourable gentleman says, that this should not be seen as a tug of war between the European Union and Russia. But we should be in favour of the Ukrainian people being able to choose their own future. In my view, this has been as much about the Ukrainian people wanting to lean towards a better relationship with the European Union, as much about that as wanting to get rid of the appalling levels of corruption that they've had to put up with in their government. I think that is the key thing. I think it's absolutely welcome that the Foreign Secretary, and right that he was the first international leader to go to Kiev and to meet with the Ukrainian leaders. He made two important points to them. One is that they must make sure they have an inclusive set of institutions and rules and laws in the Ukraine, and they do not discriminate against minorities or Russian speakers, but also that we stand ready as members of the European Union, as leading players in the International Monetary Fund, to help the Ukraine in its hour of need. There are all sorts of steps the new Ukrainian government will have to make in order to make that possible, but if they can do that, then we should stand by them in their hour of need.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome that and providing all necessary support for the Ukrainian government. Let me say this finally. All of us recognise that this is a delicate and dangerous moment for international security, and it is the combination of diplomacy, resolve in the international community, and support for the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian self-determination that is the best hope for securing an end to this crisis. In the pursuit of that goal, I can assure the Prime Minister the government will have our full support.
I'm very grateful for what the right honourable gentleman has said this morning. I think just as we need to see tomorrow a voice of unity and clarity from the countries of the European Union, not always easy to get when there are 28 different nations around the table, but it's also very welcome that there's such a clear and unified voice going out from this House to say to the Russian government, what you have done is wrong, what you've done should not be allowed to stand, and there'll be costs and consequences not only for what has been done already, but further costs and consequences if you were to take this further.